aren't able to make it at this time today. So welcome everybody. Good to see you all, especially this close to the end of the semester. I know it always gets really crazy, but thank you for being here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kate Eaton. I'm Associate Dean for Student Success and Academic Innovation in the Rob Walton College of Global Futures. I'll keep this short so we can get to the conversation. As a college, we want to support practical, grounded discussions about teaching as AI becomes part of the classroom. And the goal of today's panel is to share what people are actually doing, what's working, and where there are still open questions so that you can hopefully leave with ideas that you can use in your own courses. So let me introduce our panelists. We have Ryan Cornell. Hi, Ryan. He's an instructor and senior global future scientist in the School of Sustainability. His work on an AI Math Tutor with José Lobo, who's also here, focuses on helping students to build quantitative skills step by step, offering a strong example of how AI can support learning without replacing it. We also have Stephen Meyerson, who's a senior instructional designer and brings experience in advising, course design, academic operations, and he's working closely with faculty to improve instruction, assessment, and course delivery. He keeps a really close eye on how AI is changing teaching in practice. And Amy, who is here, is Amy Karelitz. She's going to serve as our moderator. She's a senior instructional designer with over a decade of experience partnering with faculty on course design, alignment, and student engagement. Brings really practical course level lens to this conversation. So thank you all for being here and also for the work that you're doing in your courses. Amy, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Glad to see you all here. I was actually going to go ahead and turn it over to Stephen as one of our IDs, kind of bridging the world of faculty and ID. And Ryan is also here with us. This is sort of an informal talk. We don't have a set list of Q&A. Stephen, do you have any opening remarks, or should we just go ahead and turn it right over to Ryan?
Well, first off, I'm just going to start with, this is an emerging situation, is the best way I'm going to call it. It is an interesting tool. It is a very interesting device that we can incorporate and apply in teaching and learning spaces. I think from my perspective on this and what is sort of emerging in the conferences and conversations and the literature that's going out there is fundamentally what AI tools are doing to education is forcing a shift in design, development, and pedagogy that is essential, to be frank, because what AI is really good at is creating products, but not necessarily helping students with the process and understanding the process and why we can and do and know things. It skips over understanding. It gives you an end result. So it's going to be very essential in this integration of tools and what we're doing that we really think about how we're incorporating the capacity for students to do things more effectively and efficiently, while they're also not just cognitively offloading to the tool to get an output. So that's where the talks are right now, it seems, a lot of the ways. And those of you who are more in the trenches having to deal with this may have seen similar results and may have seen some interesting consequences of AI integration. So that's where I'll step off and let Ryan go ahead and add his 2 cents, or others.
Can I jump in real quick? I want to really emphasize something you just said, Stephen, contrasting the product versus the process. Because I think historically, students had to go through a process to create the product. And so we were able to effectively use the product as a measure of learning. But now that AI can produce that product, we have to think really creatively about how we can create that evidence of students having gone through the process. So I think that's just that has been such a helpful way to think about it for me as I think about my own teaching, that I really wanted to just highlight that.
Yes. Yes, that's very true. I come from a background of English. What is the final product in English? It's forever. It's going to be some sort of written document. Well, unless you're a person who's heavily invested in stylistics and rhetorical processes and all the other things that go into the putting together of a document, the final product is more or less okay. But in the teaching of writing, I'm really more focused. I don't really care about the final product in as much as I would have cared about how they got to that point and the multi-step way they got there, and the development that they're showing, demonstrating their understanding on the way to creating that final thing. That's what I care about. And AI is really cementing that as, how do we get them there so that they're not just creating the bane of our existence for our freshman students, the 5-paragraph essay and things like that. That's so rote and mechanical. We really got to get to the center of knowledge and their ability to say, well, the AI just output this thing, but let me tell you why it did that. As opposed to what some of you may have already seen, which is the AI output a thing and I submitted that to you. Can you tell me why it did that? Not in the slightest. The not being able to tell you, that's the learning and the knowledge we're looking for. So I think that there's definitely a lot of room to adapt and learn and grow with this. That's just going to require a reframing, and that's a lot of work and a lot of effort, and we can't solve it yesterday.
That's why, Ryan, the tool that you're working on is so cool to me, because it really does focus on the student process in terms of learning the math and learning how the numbers fit together on a more like fundamental, almost, I see it as almost spatial, like understanding the relationships between the numbers. And so can you tell us more about what you're building?
Yeah, so Jose and I are working on a project right now, which the idea behind it is that, I mean, it's going to be something that will help students out and not in that just way where here's, you have a question, here's the answer to it. I think many of us kind of grown up with that idea of like a calculator or something where you want to know what 2 plus 2 is and you type it in, it gives you the answer. But to have something that can help you out, whether it's the middle of the day or 3 in the morning, and this chatbot, this AI isn't sleeping at night. It's there whenever you actually could need it. And something that can be specialized and kind of attuned to the needs of the student based upon information from the college, the school, content of courses, future courses that can be fed into it using the Create AI Builder that ASU has. That's a phenomenal tool that, I mean, is right here at the university that we have access to, and can put the time into it to, again, really like continue to iterate and make it so it is really focused and does what we would want it to do. And as Kate kind of mentioned there, like you could have it, and that's the kind of a goal of ours, is one where it kind of walks through the steps. It asks you questions. It has that kind of Socratic method almost, built into it. And so the even though you're asking it a question, it's not like when we think of, I think a lot of times the chatbots, hey, write this essay for me. And ask the chatbot, it writes the essay and they turn it in, or at least that's our worry is what's going on sometimes with students, is that here's something where it's not going to do that. It's going to say, hey, I need help with this problem. It's like, okay, well, here's the first step of a similar problem you might do mathematically, say speaking, or some kind of quantitative problem. And then what would the next step look like? What would the step after that look like? And kind of so on and so forth, and walk them through it, as opposed to it being this fear that I think many of us have, that it's just purely giving an answer. And I think that AI does have that capability. One other thing I wanted to mention, just, I mean, I kind of jumped to that, and I would love to talk, more about the chatbot, math buddy, tutor, teacher, all of that. But based on what Stephen and Kate, you kind of initially started talking about there, it reminds me of something that I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and it was interesting you started off with that discussion because it was something I've been thinking about over the last day. Because someone on the podcast mentioned how the take-home essay is basically a relic. There's no longer any value to the take-home essay, and how there's that worry that you can just kind of type something into a chatbot, it's going to give you the answer, especially if you're not in front of your instructor. And was kind of thinking about the steps in terms of the different types of assignments we're giving students, and how once upon a time, years ago, I feel like there was all this thought put on essays, that they were this great way to see, and they were better than just like a test that said, bubble in your answers, here's this, which is purely almost asking students to like memorize facts, recite them. Do they understand the facts? We don't know, but they can recite them. And an essay was going to be this pedagogical tool where we can actually like really truly assess, did they synthesize the knowledge? Does it make sense? Can they utilize it? And now all of a sudden, is it doing that? Probably not, because a chatbot's doing it. And so if we are going into some of these classes and we're trying to create assessments that are going to tell us how much the student knows truly, and can they utilize that information, that quote unquote take home essay is probably not going to have the value that it once had. But I do think there's kind of a flip side to this as well. And I'm curious what other people, think about this, and that there's probably classes where there is a deliverable, and it's not, the assignment isn't, does the student know the content? That might be another assignment in the course, but the assignment is the deliverable. Like, you're teaching them to make something that may be similar to what they are going to create in a career sometime. And if that's the case, if the deliverable itself is it, then is there value in allowing students to use certain AI to create that? Because in the workplace, they are also going to probably be using AI for it. And I almost feel like we need to have this like separation of those two as two distinctly different types of assignments. One that is assessing knowledge and one that is assessing the deliverable itself. So I just had to get that. I was thinking about that exactly when you were both bringing that up. So I'm curious what others think about it. That's been on my mind of late.
So I'm going to piggyback on what you just said, Ryan, because that is kind of the crux of also what's happening in a lot of these discussions, which is whatever our personal morals and ethical concerns with AI are in our service to students, we have to look at the space beyond academia and what we're doing here. And a lot of folks are going, unless something extreme happens, AI isn't really going anywhere. So we do have to start incorporating that knowledge in what we're doing. And if a student says they don't want to engage with it, that's a conversation to have. But one of the things we need to be doing is really onboarding with this idea. I mean, obviously there's bias in what I'm about to say, but a tech CEO who's in charge of AI is already going off the deep end saying the vast majority of jobs are going to go the way of the dodo, unless you're a blue collar worker or you're neurodivergent, because those are the ones who are going to be adaptable to thinking in ways AI can't think. And I think one of the interesting things I saw very recently was, are we being, I fully forgot the metaphor, unfortunately, but the example was, are we preachers, pastors, meaning the knowledge is already defined and we're telling them exactly what the answer is? Or are we helping them explore? Are we researchers? Are we teaching them to question and think and follow the process to come to a conclusion, whatever that conclusion may be? I can think of historically courses that I've been a part of or helped work design work in, where the feedback turned into, no, there is a defined answer to this. Well, if there's a defined answer, then there's not inquiry, there's not seeking and search, and AI can solve that much faster than any person, because it can look through all of the aggregated data that's been trained and all the other things. So if we're not teaching people how to do the process and research, that would be, that's the challenge, is really getting to that point.
Hey, I'm just keeping an eye on the chat, and Hallie raises a good question here. She says, I'm curious about assessments focused on process, how this is standardized and not overwhelming for instructors who may be facing larger and larger classes. Scaling is a great problem to have, but it does, change your availability. Whether we're going through pages of review of dialogue a student has with AI may not be efficient. Yeah, absolutely. Hallie, I am working with Jose on an AI project for his SOS 102. And that was one of the conversations that I had with the superhuman team. On the one hand, you've got the student interacting with an AI to produce ultimately a piece of writing. Well, the piece of writing is only going to be under 1,000 words, 800 to 1,000 words deliverable. But the chat log with the AI may be very, very, very long. And no instructor is going to read through the entire chat log as part of grading this assignment. So with the superhuman team, we were talking about the kind of data that an instructor might like to get. How long did the student work with the AI? What were some of the things that came up? So these are things to keep in mind, is to what degree you want to look at the chat to see the students process. I'll pause right there. Hallie, did you want to elaborate on your question or any just your thought process or what's on your mind behind that?
No, I mean, I like the idea of this, but I think there are many ways to arrive at a solution or a product, and we want to encourage students to demonstrate that there's not just one pathway. It's, there's lots of, but that is a very difficult thing to do, very time consuming. And I know we're facing situations where we're not going to have a lot of support and we're being asked to kind of work with less in a sense in terms of human resources for the student. And I'm just nervous about some of these shortcuts that measure things, metrics that may not really, I mean, capture what we're trying to capture. And can become kind of, superficial in a sense. Did people like something? Did they, these kinds of metrics, are they really capturing what we're wanting to capture? And then we end up back at square one. So that's just, I'm don't have any answers. I just wondered if people have had good experiences and know how to do this well at scale. As we think about, where we've been trained to kind of look at an output and kind of look for all the right things, but that's exactly what a AI will be able to produce very quickly. So all these ideas about using rubrics and, making it very clear, all these things suddenly become the actual vulnerability, rather than the solution.
Hallie, thank you so much. That's such an important question. I've thought about it a lot, and a lot of the rhetoric, I think, around AI is, this is great, but the human in the loop is really important. And I mean, if I had $1 for every time I've heard human in the loop, and so I've tried to center a lot of my thinking, at least on like, what does this mean, human in the loop, for my discipline? Like, what would the human need to do with the AI output, on the job? Is it really just a report that they're sending to their boss, or are they like collecting information to try to make a decision? And I'm wondering if thinking about what they do with the output or the product downstream could be a fruitful avenue to brainstorm around what our in-course expectations or deliverables might look like. For example, I had an assignment where students had to do a whole bunch of research and pull in a lot of data and use that information to make decisions and recommendations about what an organization should do next. And historically, a large portion of that class was devoted to how do we get good information? How do you do the research to get the data and the inputs to this decision? And what I often saw happen in the class was that students would get that front end really well, and then just because of time constraints in the course, like things tended to fall apart with regard to the downstream thinking that had to happen. And so in some respects, I think that AI is exciting in that it can shave off a lot of the time intensive kind of aggregation of data points grunt work, and allow us to focus more on, okay, what is pulled together? Is this good, reliable information? Is this relevant to the decision? And what do we do next with it? So what I started having students do is outline possible avenues to respond to the information. So they had a step where they interpreted it, and then they had to ideate on what are 3 choices that I could make here? What are the pros and cons of these choices? What are implications downstream from these different action options, and then they had to pick one and then argue for why that's the best option. And so then when I graded it, I was very, very specifically looking for, are they talking about pros and cons? Are they talking about, downstream effects besides just this will solve everything? And that was how I was able to be more efficient in grading it, is that in my head, I had these like very specific kind of checklist. This is what I'm looking for in their thinking that I could pick out relatively quickly. So I don't know if that's a helpful way to think about it, but that's something I've been doing that hasn't been too onerous so far from a grading standpoint.
Stephen's got
No, sorry, I just
Kelly.
wondering whether students just use that. I mean, they just keep asking the AI to do those extra steps, and so, I mean, I was having students on a discussion forum using AI when I was asking for their opinion. And so, it seems like they're not even looking at what the question is anymore. They're just kind of putting it in and like generating stuff out, and just not bypassing, the engagements to a sense. So, I mean, when that was the case, I was like, wait a minute, you guys, I'm not even asking for a polished essay here. I'm not asking for citations. I want your thoughts about this, but it's like they're not even, it's just efficiency. I've got to get to that, whatever is the output in the end. And so I don't know.
So I was just, I'm sorry, Stephanie, was that you?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was also trying to think about how we can scaffold it in such a way that, the student has to be in the loop, kind of, right? As Hallie said, when you were saying that, I was thinking, well, I would just ask AI to come up with the next ones. But anyway, I think it's probably more sophisticated than that. But so one thing that I had done was this was it was online class, and we had students, they were having to do research each week, which they could use AI for. They just had to cite that they used it on specific topics, right? But it was within one area, and each student had their own area of focus. And so then for the final assignment for this, I was teaching the class with Robin Martin. We said, okay, have AI aggregate all your individual, research, and then, show the essay, and then edit it and explain why you edited it the way you did. So the reason, and I said also then reflect on it. And at this point, the student was kind of an expert in the topic, right? And we were asking AI to do what it does really well, which is aggregate stuff. But then we had the student be a critical reader of that because they actually knew a lot at that point, And so it seemed like a useful thing. And the students all said, yeah, they had most of the stuff there, but the priorities were really off. They didn't, there was like this big thing that I took away from this, and it was really, not represented well. So in that case, it was pretty easy to grade, and the students seemed to get something out of it. And I felt like they were in a position at that point to do a stronger critique. So that's one of the times that we used AI that has worked. I'm really interested in learning about totally new types of assignments that we can use AI for good. It's taken like I think I've gained on average an hour in the day from my AI use. It's so much stuff that was kind of routine things. Yeah, Hallie is saying a compendium of AI-based assignments. I think that would be terrific. Things that we found sort of worked well for us, like Kate, we could get yours and I could put this one in, and that would give us some ideas about how to adapt them to our classes.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to do that. And that kind of leads into what I want to mention about this is, what do we do with AI? How can we do something different? Which is one of our challenges is frequently we're trying to train students who are going to have to go talk to people. They're going to have to evaluate stakeholders. They're going to have to do all this. Kind of the old school way of doing that was you dummied up a general profile, or you had them go evaluate a thing. Well, with AI, you can actually create mentors or stakeholders, and you build out their profile and you give them character and flesh them out, and you have students download the profile and they have to load it into ChatGPT or their AI of choice, but then you give them the expectations of how they're supposed to interact with that. So the thing we can do with students is to start giving them that practice in the application of their learning. This more higher 300, 400 grad level courses that would really benefit from this, but you can start incorporating lower level ideas of that. Say, hey, you have to talk to this person. This is their back, and you build out the profile and you load that in and you tell the students, I need you to go engage with this character. Ask it whatever questions you want to ask it in your area. And you can do these targeted demographic things, kind of keep it focused on their lived experience. Way of, in my life, I'm a constructivist at heart. Constructivists believe that knowledge is constructed from experience and where you're situated. So a person who grew up in the rural South is going to be very different than somebody who grew up in the middle of New York City, and how they approach a problem is going to be different. So you get this opportunity to frame knowledge a little bit more with that. Jacob, that's exactly where one of these courses that's doing that. So other people are really testing the waters with it in more advanced ways. And so that's a big one. I know we have some more computationally focused folks here, and this is a little non sequitur from what I was just saying, but as in regards of, but what if I can't change the means of assessment? What if it is a computational class and they have to know how to do the computations, but they can still AI it? A very interesting thing that was proposed, and this kind of goes on to a policy, an idea of your syllabus and policy, is somebody recently proposed random auditing, where you randomly sample students after major assessments. And the logic was the IRS randomly audits folks to keep everyone else in line, but it's only 1% to 3% at most. So, in a class of 30, you're auditing 2-3 students, and it does have to be randomized. So you could randomly audit the same person 3 times, depending on your assessments. But it's a risk reward thing. Hey, I audited 3 students and all 3 of them didn't know the stuff when I actually had the conversation. Guess what? And this person proposed it. It's still in their nascent stages of whether or not it's valid or working. And their background is economics and policy. So that was part of their logic there. But there's a lot of new ways to
Can I just ask a question, Stephen? Sorry to interrupt, but what did they do then? So did they fail those students? And then what about the 97% who
they apply they did the auditing, and then the logic was the risk, all the students were doing risk reward calculations, kind of a thing. So if the risk is greater than the reward, they're not gonna cheat. So in his early steps, he said he did not find any of his students to have been cheating. They were able to do it because of that kind of over preparation result. But it's a sample size of 1 instructor with 1 course, maybe 2 runnings of it. So you have maybe a pool of 60 students. So that's not perfect, but it's a good enough start. And he was trying to get other people on board. This was at a conference the other week. So it's just an idea of a way to do it. And that's really more focused on computational type courses where you need to just know, you need to have that recall knowledge for certain things.
I think one important thing to think about too is like what these LLMs are and how they exist, in that they have basically digested the internet and all of this information that is within them. But that doesn't mean that everything in our courses is inside these LLMs. And there's probably some of the content in the courses that's made its way in there, or previously, was out there before we even brought it into the course and is in the LLM. But videos from courses, other content like that probably does not, I mean, almost undoubtedly, this stage in the game doesn't exist inside these LLMs. And so if you want to try to create an assignment that you can feel pretty good about, like has some kind of guardrails in place, it could be some sort of discussion, it could be an essay where you're actually exactly, Jake, you're kind of like going in there and like it could be your presentation and your video debates, these things that are actually built into the course. It doesn't have access to it, and not making it so onerous that the student is gonna, it doesn't have to be too over the top, but just maybe has to reference some of those points. You can have a discussion where you have to actually mention to the student, you tell the student that they need to have at least two or three different citations, basically. And it doesn't have to be some specific format, but just you need to cite where in the video that content came from. Because an LLM's not going to know that video that is inside our Canvas, class shell and all of that. And so you can kind of prevent some of that unless they're completely faking the references. I think it does do a pretty good job of, and so I think we all need to be kind of cognizant of like what probably exists in the LLM.
Sarah, you had your hand up a moment ago. Hannah, we'll come back to you in just a moment. Sarah, did you want to question or comment for
I have
us?
so many questions, probably can't answer them all, but couple of them. Well, first of all, just on like I find AI really useful for me, but I've gone through an educational system, used critical thinking, have developed a whole bunch of different skills and can navigate what I'm seeing. And I, as a parent of several teenage kids from 17 all the way to 24. Well, they're not teenage, but anyway, who have very differing relationships with AI. Some are like, I am absolutely not using this, and some are like, this is their way of life. I'm really worried about the cognitive impact this has in terms of like how easy it is to use it. And of course, there's the argument, well, anytime any new technology, the calculator came in, there was people saying, oh my God, this is going to destroy the way that we, think of math and so forth. But I think the variables here are so wide that it makes it really complicated. Like just in this room, I wonder how many of us actually know the same tools that exist. Like I know there's Superhuman, Mentor AI. I use a bunch of other different tools. And then we have different abilities of how we deploy them and then potentially teach them. And I wonder if we're creating way too many variables across the board where we then are not enhancing that cognitive ability that the students will have. Big question. I don't know that we have answers, but I just wanted to raise it because I'm like struggling with it myself.
You raised some great points, Sarah. Does anybody have a response? Maybe not an answer, but a response or reaction? Or does it just raise more questions for the group? Well, Ryan or Stephen or anybody? If not, we can move on over to Hannah. You had your hand up a moment ago. Hannah, some questions or comments for us?
Oh, I just put it in the chat, but this is kind of following up on what Ryan was saying about utilizing materials that are in Canvas. This year with 315, so the undergraduate energy policy class, I've been experimenting with, instead of having them do a bunch of reading that they don't do anyway, instead pre-recording about a third of the lecture. So it's not fully a flipped classroom, but like, so I have these lectures on YouTube that are linked in the Canvas shell. So for their, preparation for class, it'll usually be watching that lecture plus maybe a current event news article I'll post or something. And then I have a little 5-minute quiz at the start of every class while I'm getting my, class set up. And I don't post I usually give the students the slides, but I don't post the slides until after the quiz. So there's no way that they could answer the quiz. And it's like a dead easy quiz. And most of the time it's like, tell me something you learned from the video, or what's a question you still have after watching the video, something like that. But something where, it has to be linked to the video that they watched. And I think it's worked well. And I actually had a couple students say, thank you for doing this, because now they feel rewarded for the fact that they actually watched the video. Yeah, so just echoing what Ryan was saying, this just as one example of using material in Canvas.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Hannah. Oh, was there a comment? I heard somebody start.
Yeah. Hannah, that's a great way to do that. And like you said, you're starting to flip the classroom. You're not fully flipped, but you're starting that. And that's going to be kind of where I think we're at, which is online's a whole other can of worms, in asynchronous. But the idea of, I mentioned it up front, Hannah, which you joined a little bit late, but I was talking about really what this is doing is forcing a redress of our pedagogy and how we teach, and what breaking our own expectations and assumptions about teaching and learning and what has to happen or how we do things. Not that what we did was wrong, but that the landscape is shifting and we either shift with it or we get left behind. And there's certainly businesses and other people out there who view higher ed as a non-essential space anymore. And if we don't match the expectations and profit values and all those other things that I don't pretend to understand, we're probably going to suffer the consequences of that. And that brings up something really cool. And I mentioned policy earlier, but in much of what the conversations like Sarah brought up about the cognitive effects of these things, this happened with the more recent generation who grew up with their smartphones. And we call them digital natives. Just because they have this doesn't actually mean they know how to use it. They know how to do all the surface level functions. They can find the apps and do the things, but are they really leveraging it for what it can do and the potential of what it can do? I don't think they are. And I think a lot of that is demonstrable. Some of the assumptions we have about what our students are capable of, and how can we onboard them and train them and teach them and show them. One of those things is, I want a policy on my syllabus. I want a policy on my syllabus. If it just exists in the syllabus, but nowhere else in the course, then we're missing an opportunity to bring students up to speed and make sure we've leveled the playing field with everybody. And I think that happens more often than we care to admit across the board, where a student just doesn't know what they're missing out on because they refuse to read the syllabus. But if we never go back to that syllabus anywhere in our course, if we never retouch on that in our lectures or our videos, then we're also signaling to students that it doesn't really matter. It's like the terms and agreements on our apps. We scroll all the way to the bottom, we hit agree, and then that thing goes, hey, did you know you approved us to sell your data to somebody? No, I had no idea. Well, we're kind of doing the same thing. Not intentionally, it's just sort of par for the course of what happens, because we've got so much to cover and so much to do, and I don't need to go back to that thing. So that's really what I mean when I say we've got to go back to looking at how we're teaching and what we're doing. And I would love to say I have a defined answer for you today, but I have a very strong feeling that if I said, here's the best thing you can do right now, somebody was incentivized to go make an AI that circumvented that process. And that's kind of where we're at right now. We're sort of chasing our tails.
So Jacob posted a very very good question in the chat, basically asking, which I'm hearing a lot of commentary broadly about this. So what are some examples of AI proof assignments, or assignments that would use AI in an effective and appropriate way? So I know that people want a list. They want a showcase of, here are some new ways to do assignments in this new world of AI. And I don't think it's as simple as, here's a list of new and different assignments. From the ID perspective, I'm always going to go back and say, what are your learning outcomes? What is the learning outcome for the course? What is the learning outcome for the module? What's the learning outcome for the assignment? If your outcomes are written well, if they're measurable, if they make connections, then going back to the idea of process over product, this is what I do in my own classes. I have course level outcome and module level outcome, and my students are doing assignments to meet the outcome. Some of them use AI, some of them go very old school, do it all on paper. A lot of people use a combination, but what we're talking about is, this is the goal. How you get there, let's talk about it, but this is the goal that we're looking for. And I think that's been working out really, really well. My students use AI in different ways. They acknowledge it. They tell me what worked and what didn't. So perhaps we could take a few minutes and turn the conversation that way. Maybe you all, as you're thinking about the courses you're teaching, and potential ways to bring in AI as a tool or to AI proof your assignments. Perhaps would you, anybody be interested in talking from the learning outcome perspective? We can maybe kick it back over to Ryan, since you are in the middle of this with your math courses. Is that a way that helps you think about using AI, or just curious, what do you maybe think about that?
Um, I mean, whenever I talk to you, it's learning outcomes. So I usually will go to you for the, make sure everything fits nice and, neat with all of that. But first, I mean, kind of address the specific types of assignments. Like I said earlier, I mean, anything that's going to reference back to content that maybe the LLMs can't access is going to have like a leg up in terms of being somewhat AI proof. I kind of wonder, and it seems like a little bit of an easy way out, if we'll see more and more of online proctoring or the lockdown browsers. I mean, it seems, like I said, it's nothing innovative in terms of like, oh, we're going back to an essay. The essay has existed forever. But instead of having that, here, write a 5-page paper with, this, and that, criteria you have to meet. Because as I kind of led off with, like if we're looking at from a pedagogical standpoint, like the goal of said assignment is to determine, did the student understand the material? Can they apply the material within this context that we want them to apply it? They're just not like this rote memorization where they're spitting it back out and don't really know what it means. And an essay kind of does a pretty good job of that compared to, I mean, it's better than, it's not perfect, but it's better than other solutions. Is having them just do an essay again, but having it, it's a shorter one. They have 2 hours, they can log into Canvas. And I mean, I know there's students that still find ways around to kind of circumvent and hack the lockdown browsers. But I don't know. I mean, that's something out there. And I know that's not an innovative thing because lockdown browsers have existed, proctoring has existed, but I have talked to faculty that say, they do a lot online, but then any of their written assessments are in class, like they want to be able to walk around and see the, going back to like writing things out by hand even. And I know it seems like we're kind of going backwards with, some of that, but I kind of, or even, I mean, I love the idea of the 5-minute quiz, Anna, that you brought up. I think that's just, I think videos, I think Jacob mentioned too, like making more videos, I think we can hit different learning outcomes with that too, in terms of it's not perfect. And I do wonder at times when I've been grading a video and you kind of see the student looking a little to the side. I'm like, did you just go to AI and say, print out a script and it's like sitting on your wall over there? But I do kind of feel like anytime we add that little bit of friction, like, I mean, we want to do our best. Anything I do, I want to try to do the best I can possibly do. But like, we have to sometimes, I think, realize too, we're probably not going to catch or prevent every situation. But sometimes when you add that little bit of friction in, the student's like, well, yeah, I might as well just make a video, if I'm gonna have to do this and write this and there. So I think there's some benefit to that as well. I think videos, presentations, referencing content that the LLMs don't have access to. But then, yeah, I also wonder just, lockdown browsers and things along that. I'm curious what other people think about that.
Well, Jose has his hand up. Jose, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Well, let me make some comments, which I'm going to acknowledge perhaps are in a very different direction. Look, I am neurodivergent. I happen not to be that fond of humans to begin with. So I mean, I say that because I do think that perhaps in this conversation, we're kind of missing what are some of the potential developments here. First, LLMs are not AI. It's a tool used by AI. My perspective on this is as someone who's trained in physics and mathematics. So I ask myself, I happen to think that one of the highest expressions of the human mind is doing mathematics and doing proofs. Can AI today do proofs that human beings have never done before? The answer is yes, it can. And in our math department, there's an awareness that AI is completely altering how we teach math. Look, we're talking about building a chatbot. I think I'm a good math teacher. I think Ryan's a great math teacher. Do I believe we can build a chatbot that will basically be better than I am at teaching math? Yes, I do. Would that mean that one day ASU will decide, we don't need you, Jose? Maybe. But my goal in this chatbot is I want students to have access to an awesome teacher in algebra, so I don't have to do it in class. But then, to me, the challenge is, then what do I do that's different in class? But I'm going into this. I have absolutely no doubt that whatever makes me a great teacher can be instantiated by an agentic AI. It can. And one last word is, I think we ought, in academia, I think we need to take seriously that out there, the people who are actually pushing AI who happen to be in companies, they take the goal of creating an artificial intelligence seriously. They are not out to look for creating aids. That talk about human in the loop. That's corporate speak so that we don't bother them. They want to create a system that will be more intelligent than Jose. And whatever Jose can do it faster. The challenge for us in academia is when that day arrives, and I have heard President Michael Crow raise this question, when that day arrives, what is our role as faculty? But I do sometimes wonder that in this conversation, look, I know we have to take care of cheating, believe me. Although I think sometimes some of us speak as if all undergraduates are just willing to cheat. I think we need to be considering is whatever we think we can do as teachers, we do really believe an artificial system cannot recreate it? That's available 24/7, that's not judgmental, that doesn't make snide remarks, that doesn't transmit the message in their facial expressions. You have asked that question 5 times, you ought to consider a career in plumbing. You think if you ask most students, would they rather have access to that system than to this or that professor? Come on. Most teachers suck at what they do. That was my experience in college. That's what I hear from students. They even tell me that about myself every so often. So again, I guess, but I admit a future in which AI system replace professors does not depress me. But again, I'm neurodivergent. So anyway, that's just my take, which I realize might be very different.
Thank you, Jose. So I wanted to just jump in really quickly and thank Sonja Klinsky for joining us. She had very graciously agreed to join us for the second half of this session since she's been so busy with recruiting in her unit. But Dr. Klinsky is an associate professor in the School of Sustainability. She focuses on justice and climate policy, and she's been doing some cool things in CGF 194 to develop a structured approach to generative AI that emphasizes transparency, accuracy, fairness, and accountability. So I was hoping we could just hear a bit from Sonja for a few minutes about what she has done in her class and how it's working so far.
Sure. Some big caveats. First of all, huge apologies, everyone. As you may know, we're in the middle of a hiring process right now, and we had an interview, and then the next people were also late, so I'm really sorry. I apologize. The next caveat is that anything I did in my CGF course, I did in conjunction with Stephanie and Jose, both of whom are online here. I saw Stephanie, maybe yes, who are online here. So anything I do, I really cannot claim solo credit for. It was a joint effort, and I'm not, we're all muddling through. So I can't claim that we've cracked any code here for how to do this. What we want to I'm going to be very brief here. We thought about this in a couple of different ways. I know one of the conversations that's been had a lot has been recommending that people have very, very clear statements in their syllabi. And we took this very seriously. We spent a lot of time and many iterations trying to build a actual policy in our syllabus. As Kate mentioned when briefly introducing me, it had several very clear components: transparency. I can actually maybe the best thing to do would be actually to show you it. Give me a moment, I can bring it up. It was quite long. It was quite detailed. We especially went out of our way to have on our very first day, we walked through it with students. We showed them what it looked like. We talked about it. We explained why it existed. And I actually think it was a failure. And that's actually what I wanted to mention today. We've heard a lot from administration about the necessity of having these policies. And I think we do need to have a policy, because if you don't have a policy, when the policy isn't followed, you don't have anything to have a meaningful conversation with the student about. However, policies themselves in this format, I think, are almost useless, especially with undergraduate students. CGF 194 is 100 level students. They are, for many of them, this was the very first class they had ever taken in university ever. Like their first day on campus was in our class. expecting a group of students at that level to work through a fairly complex, multifaceted policy and remember and apply it for a 15-week course is pretty unrealistic. So I think one of the key lessons for us was while it was useful to have the policy, I think we all need to be thinking much more carefully about how we embody these policies. So, for instance, we had this issue where, yes, you could use AI as long as you were transparent about it. Students found that very confusing because that was one thing, and I'll come back to it in a minute. So that's one thing we did was have a very clear policy, and I'll talk through that in a little bit. The other thing we did was we built several assignments. And again, I really want to give credit here to Jose and Stephanie, who were spearheading this, who we built several assignments in the class to make sure that every student had some experience with AI. So again, we've talked, and the conversation often turns to, oh, students are misusing AI. The other concern is, yes, but some students coming in from high school, depending on what high schools they're come from, have no experience. And part of our obligation to level the playing field is that every student gets to have some interaction with this and some structured way of engaging with it. And for some of our students, it was the first time that they had engaged with AI. So we did, and then we finally also had an actual course or a class day which Jose led, which really talked through the sustainability issues with AI so that students would understand why AI does raise specific sustainability issues. So there were three main touch points in the course. Oh yes, Stephanie can say we actually used AI to help us generate these assignments. So of these three touch points in this course, at the 100 level, to students these are mostly SUST students, so they are not students with whom we have any other touches points. These are not students in the school or the college. This may be our only interaction with them. Of the three, I would say the policy was the least effective. What I've done since in my other courses is I've taken that same policy, shortened it, similarly made it part of the introduction of the course, but then actually built the transparency into every single assignment. So now every single assignment includes a template that says very clearly, if you used AI in any way in this assignment, how did you use it? Explain here, as a reminder to students constantly that if they're using it, there's a chance to reflect on it. And I found that much, much more helpful. In terms of the assignments, students, I think we had mixed experience, and I'd love to hear from Jose and Stephanie. These assignments, most of them were attempts to use AI and then reflect on what they got back and to kind of reflect on that asking, receiving process and the kind of biases that were coming at them from the AI. So recognizing that it was giving them certain kinds of information, but not others, depending on how they framed the question, to try to generate that sensitivity about what you ask and what you get. Some of the experience there with students did make comments that it added a lot to the course in terms of just the number of assignments we had. So there's some trade-offs there. One of my concerns has been as more of us start to do some of these sort of sensitizing assignments, we're very likely to end up in a situation where students have multiple of the same assignment in different classes. And so I think there's a need as a faculty to be reflecting on which kinds of sort of sensitivity to bias, introduction to AI, basic assignments we're using. I know a few years ago we discovered in the sustainability that students in sustainability were doing, carbon footprints like multiple times. This could be a very similar kind of a situation where we all end up using some of the same introductory assignments. So I would love to flag that as a conversation. And then the last one, we had a lot of students, not a lot, we had a small number of very vocal students who did not want to use AI, which caused some complications when you've created a class which has AI assignments and it's a sustainability class, and students saying, well, because of sustainability issues, this is kind of a conscientious objector to AI. So how to accommodate those? We ended up making parallel assignments, but pointing out to them that even if they were using Google, they were actually in today's world, you can't actually avoid AI in many situations. So that became an issue with the assignments. And then actually having a day on the mechanics of it, I felt was very, very helpful. A lot of the students, I think, didn't actually know about the sort of nuts and bolts of what a data center looks like and why AI poses particular problems. But again, if we're going to do this across our classes, we probably need to have a coordinated approach so they're not getting the same class 10 times in 10 different classes. So I'm sorry for missing the rest of the class or rest of the discussion. I'm apologize for any duplication I've given anybody. And I really want to stress that Jose and Stephanie probably have more to say than I do here and more expertise. But with that, that's sort of what I can offer with huge apologies for being late.
Sonja, we are just glad that you're here. We know that you were busy with the recruitment effort, so I'm just glad that you were here. And thank you for your for offering your experience and your perspective using AI. You reflected a lot of the comments that were made even before you got here. So thank you for your contribution. That last little bit, you were talking about how a handful of students objected to using AI. I get it. And you had to produce, you said, parallel assignments for them. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about aligning to your learning outcomes. Either way, whether the students used an AI or pen to paper, as long as they're meeting the same learning outcome, then the tool that they use to get there is a little bit less important. So that's where I would kind of leave that. Friends, we have about 3 minutes left. I do want to thank everybody for coming. Are there any last questions, comments, requests, anything on anybody's mind as we are bringing this discussion to a close?
So there's been a great kind of parallel chat happening in the chat. And I just want to share some kind of outcomes of that sidebar. Namely, I'm going to create a Google Drive so where we can share example assignments and AI policies and all the things, the collateral that we've kind of been developing independently. Hopefully we can share with one another. So when we send out the recording for this session, I will also include a link to that shared drive. So please feel free to share what you've worked on that drive and also to peruse the drive when you need ideas. And hopefully this can be a living shared resource that we can continue to build on and develop together.
I was just going to add kind of final thoughts on it in terms of I mean, this is so unbelievably multifaceted. There's so many different aspects of this we could talk about, but if there's probably kind of two big areas. One would be what we've been discussing a lot with the students in terms of what can we do to make sure that we're properly assessing them in ways that are thoughtful and effective. And then the other side, I think, is how we can use AI to create content that is going to help the students out. So it's more kind of on the instructor side of things. And we're talking about what Jose and I are developing and just other areas. And I thought of this too, because Jacob mentioned earlier, used the word creative. And I mean, I'm the same way. I love kind of trying to be creative for students and come up with something that's going to be really beneficial to them. And I think that one aspect we didn't have much time to talk about today is how AI at times can be like having a team of software developers, but you do have to have that creativity. It's not just going to do it for you. You can't just walk in, open your computer and say, make a great lesson, or I'm creating this course, do it all for me. But if you have that sense of kind of creativity, it really can turn that creativity into something that's really pretty impressive. And I think that is, the tool that we have at our disposal now. And again, you got to have the idea, you got to have the thought, you got to guide it. And I think interacting with the AI sometimes is, you got to be really careful about the structure of the words you're using. It's kind of like talking to someone who's coming into the field without a whole lot of background knowledge. You got to be really precise with your language, but I think it's a great tool for that as well. So it's kind of the two sides of it, and both of which have opportunities and pitfalls.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ryan. Stephanie.
Just real quick, if I could just tell you a quick funny story along the lines. So I asked Ed Finn, who does this futures thinking, I said, how can I make the future more real for my students? And he said, have them age themselves. Research has shown that you tend to, save for retirement if you see an image of you aged, right? So in their final presentations that they gave as teams, they had to age themselves. And it completely flopped, The reason why is that they're all used to filters and everything nowadays. So for us, it was like a shock to see ourselves aged, right? But they did it, and everything. But it was just really funny to see that this kind of, techno gap between, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been a great session. I appreciate everybody attending and all the great discussion. Stephen, Kate, any final thoughts, or are we ready to close the Zoom and get back to everyone's busy days?
I'll have just one quick final thought, which is thank you, Sonja. Reinforcement of ideas already presented just reaffirms that we're all on the same track, hopefully the right one, but we're on the same track of thought and what we need to do. And, just to Stephanie's point, something I mentioned right before Sonja joined us, or maybe you caught it, is that our students are digital natives. Doesn't necessarily mean they know what they're doing, but they're not unfamiliar. And we have the duty to shepherd them through the right way to do things, to benefit instead of just to maximize whatever it is they're searching for. Likes, clicks, views, any of that.
I just wanted to say thank you so much, Amy, Stephen, Ryan, Sonja, for sharing your expertise today, especially because for I think all of us, and I mean this in the best way possible, like we're not experts. So it's very kind of you to share what you're trying, what's working, what's not working, how you're exploring the issues, because this is definitely uncharted territory for all of us. And I appreciate you all being such supportive co-learners for the greater group here in the college. And I look forward to us continuing these conversations.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day, and I'm sure we'll see you around the office. Bye, everybody.